Hi, hello guys, how are you? I can share some topic also in mechanical engineering in one of the component is a bolt. When is a bolts is a metal pin with head at one end and shank threaded at another end to receive inert. When some uses of the bolts transfer of forces in following when point and end connections in tension and compression members built up compound members also columns bases and trusses and connections beam column or beam connection when some classification also bolted of the connection and bolted connection also when on the basis of resultant and forces. There are three types: concentric connections, eccentric connections, and movement resisting connections. When another one on the basis type of the forces also when shear connections and tension connections and shear and tension connections also when on the basics of force of mechanism when using two types bearing type and friction type and when show the some topics also and show the some images please shown when is the one of the section in the bracket of the plate and column some image when it is another one is a fixing of image in the bolt section is the underground when I have the seen the main plate and cover plate using of the single cover a single bolted butt joint when double cover and double bolted and butt joint okay and when an another also hanger connection and using of tension mode when is a some dimensions also and work vision and bearing of the deformation when and bearing type and using of the bearing connection and friction connection okay and some types of the bolts when mostly and two types of bolts when ordinary bolts and high strength of the bolts when is the one thing also ordinary bolts is the ordinary bolts also unfinished bolts or the black bolts when used in light structures and secondary members example of purlins and bracings etc when roof of the trusses and made from the low carbon steel in the main and using some diameter also and show the figure and the 5 mm and to the 36 mm as a M5 and M36 when is in structural steel also M16 M20 M24 and M30 some used when net tensile area as a per threads and 0.78 into nominal plane when the bearing type of the connections when using of the grade 3.6 and the 4.6 and the 4.8 etc is the highest standards of the 3167 when I can show the grades of the some bolts using of the highest standards 1367 as a 2002 model when some I can show some table we can show when second type of the high strengthened and bolts when this type used of heavy members and joints subjected to vibrations or shocks and in this bolt of the made from high carbon steel and some shown the figure the diameter of the 16 mm and 236 mm and M16 and M36 okay it's a structure of steel and M16 and M20 and M24 and M30 some steel washers also is provided when have to be lightened and strongly to permit load and transfer by friction and primary no slippage so friction type of the connection I can use them when using of 8s and 8.8s and 10s and 10.9s as per IS standards 3757 and 1985 and IS standards and 4000 and 1992 okay and bolts also some specifications and using of the some IS standards 800 and 2007 and specifications also are diameter of the bolt and hole and bolt and pitch and edge and distance and end and distance and gauge okay when I can show the end distance of the double cover butt joint and edge distance and lap joint with the edge plates. When is some source also code specifications also, diameters of bolt and size and bolt of the holes also. One diameter of bolts and connections with less number of a large diameter holes better than same with more number of smaller diameter of bolts. When less bolts equal to less bolt holes and equal to better of the capacity. When large dia holes suitable where shear governors and shear capability of bolt directly proportional to the degrees. When I can show the some clearance of the table. Okay. When I can share the some details in the pitch. The pitch also a distance between the centers of two constituents and bolts along bolt rope placed and parallel to stress in the member. And minimum pitch also when to prevent of the bearing failure of the members between two bolts to ensure the enough space in the tighten the bolt prevent and overlapping to washers. Okay. When I can maximum in the distance of the between center to fasteners, example 2.5 times to the normal distance by the fastener. Okay, this is another one is a maximum pitch. The maximum pitch also to reduce the length of the connections and to have the uniform stress in the bolt. I can show some matter in my flow chart. Okay, and again one gauge. Gauge means is a distance between the adjacent and bolt lines or distance between the back of the rolled section. When and first bolt line are center to center, distance between two consecutive bolts along with the member. I can show some table and roller steel beams you can visit. And edges and edges of distance in the bolt. The distance at the right time angle to the direction of the stress are from center of the bolt holes to adjacent of the edge of the member in edges of distance. The distance in the direction of a stress from the center of a hole, the end of the element, the end of the distance. The bolt should not be placed to the near of the edge of the because the failure of a place to tension and many occur. By steel of the plate, the opposite to the hole, many example of a bulget out of the end crack. Then two types of the minimum edge of the distance and maximum edge of the distance. When I can show and table. This is a partial safety factor of the materials. You can check the 1.1 point, you can clear the visible. Yeah, I can share again lap and butt joints and using of bolts. When I have this visible in some topics also using of lap joint and double bolted lap joint and single cover butt joint and single bolted lap joint and eccentrically in lap joint and single covered single bolted butt joint. When single covered double bolted butt joint and double covered a single bolted butt joint, we have the scene. When another is a double covered single bolted butt joint and the lap joint bolt is single shear. I can using at forces and two side also and double covered double bolted and butt joint and forces some example pull and push a motion. When butt joint bolt is a double shear force of the motion. Okay, and bearing type of connections as per IS 800 standards and 2007 purpose. When bearing type of a connection, that two also members may slip over each other and bolt may fail in the shear, bearing or tension if any. When modes of failure of a bolt connections, some failures are there. Example, shear failure of bolts and bearing failure of plates and bearing failure of the plates and another one tension failure of plates. Example, if the bolts are subject of the tension purpose and tension fail of the plates. Example is a tearing of plates occur due to the tension when occurs when bolts are stronger than the project. Okay, when I can share shear failure of the bolts is a two type, single shear and double shear. When shearing of a bolt shank, I can show one of a diagram and one of the picture you can vision is a total of the load and single failure plate and middle of the load I can show them. Okay, and bearing failure of the bolts. The bolts also crushed along half of the circumference. When the heavily stressed and plate presses the bolt shank, okay, occurs when plate is made of a high strength steel and bolts are very low grade steel, okay, and bearing of the failure of the plates. When a bolt is subjected to a shear force, I can show one plate in the visible of the image, and slip occurs and bolt comes in control of the plates also. When the plate may be and get crushed, if you plate materials as a weaker and then bolt as a material also, okay, and due to excess bearing and tearing out of the end and connections of the member may also take some place. I can show when two of the images, the crushing and bearing of the plate and bolt and shear layering out of the plate you can show. And one of the bolt are spacing or ending the distance influence, example the bearing of strength. In the lot of industry using of the bolt and the edges of the section, in this method you can useful. When tension and failure of a bolts, you can show on the one of the image in my picture when shown when bolt is subjected to tension may fail at stress and reasons also. And tension of tearing or failure of the plates. You can visible in one two images as a tearing of the failure of plates. And tearing means plates also occurs when bolts are stronger than a plates. I can share one of the image in the stronger of the plate tension you can visible. Okay, and some blocks shear and the failure. A bolt also blocks as a material within the bolted area breaks away from the remainder of the area. Occurs when high strength of bolt are used. The failure occurs with shear on one plane, example plane parallel of the force to the end in tension and perpendicular the plane, example of the perpendicular of the force when I shown the image. And strength of bolted connections. The two types, strength of connections are joint and efficiency of the connection and joints. The strength of the connections are strength of a bolts in the joint, example number of bolts into strength of a one bolt, and strength of a place connect of the bolts. When efficiency is the connection also strength of bolt joints by pitch length and divided by strength of solid plate and pitch length into 100. Okay, you can write and the strength of the bolts is a mostly and most than used of the in a mechanical industry. Number of bolts are required in the connection equal to load by strength of one ball. It's a minimum of 2-3 bolts provided if in one required also. And strength of one bolt is a minimum of the shear strength and bearing strength and tensile strength of bolt is strength of the bolt. Yeah, okay. Strength of the member in the connection. The strength plate is the member is a net tensile strength of the plate. When shear capacity and strength of the bolts, I can share one of the formula is a nominal shear capability of the bolt. You can write and reason. And reduction of the factor from shear strength of bolts is a reduction of the long joints. When the length of the joint exceeds of the some diameter, when the direction of the load to shear capacity, some joints also reduced. And where is the length joint is taken some distance between the first and last row of the bolt. The reduction factor from shear strength of a bolt. And lot of industries a large grip length also. When the grip length is a bolt engaged, the bolt is subjected a greater self building. The movement due to the shear force, the acting on the shank. Therefore, the total tolerance of the thickness and connection with the plans of exceeded. Example of the grip length. And reduction of the factor from a shear strength of the bolts. And some using of the packing plates and more than 6 and some diameter of thickness and shank of the bolt is subjected of the building, which affects of the nominal shear capability on the bolt. The bearing of the capacity strength of the bolts. When using a nominal bearing of the capacity, when using a diameter of the hole and end of the pitch and capacity, I can show some formula. When tensile strength of a bolts, example, you have the tensile strength when using of early strength of bolt and net tensile strength and ultimate tensile stress I can use. Okay, strength of the plate in the connection. When the design, the strength is tensile of the plate, the governor, the reputed of net cross-sectional area, the holes are given by some partial safety and the factor of the failure to ultimate the stress. When I can show one of the diagram, you can visit. And bolts also subjected to the combined shear and tension to the T section of the connection to the column and flange for the joining a bracing to the member is subject to the diagonal load in the bracing. The vertical component is a diagonal load is subject to shear. The bolt and horizontal is components. When I can last but not least is a slip critical connection using of the bolt a share of the IS standard 8001 2007. When slip rings also is a critical friction grip and connection. Some members are not allowed to the slip and over each other and usually when member force is large. Bolts are not subjected to shear and the bearing. Notice lighting as a fight of developer to the clamping of the force, example using of tensile force. When is a slip rings as a connections to horizontal force, when using of the force is a tolerance is and thickness of tensile force. When frictional resistance to slip between the placed surface should not exceed slip, so caution may externally apply the shear. When strength of the HSFG bolt in slip critical connections and strength of the HSFG bolt also minimum of shear strength of a bolt and bearing strength and tensile strength. When of the shear capacity and the strength of the HSFG bolt use a calculation some formula I can show you can write them. And reduction and factor for shear strength and HFSC bolts also. When the length of the joint exceed some diameter and load shear, some joints also reduce to the reduction. Is given somewhere the length is joint it takes the distance and between the first and last row of the bolts. And bearing capacity strength is a bolt shoe class also. So when the bolt is a will come is a bearing is only one the slips also. When slip occurs and joint will behave in an ordinary bearing connection. And nominal tensile capacity of the strength is a bolt classes also when is the ultimate tensile and stress also bolt when net tensile stress. And bolts subjected to combined shear and tension. As bolts also subjected the both shear tension and safety check is applied. And please watch and again and thanks for subscribe to my YouTube channel and thanks again. Bye guys.